Money host Charles Payne is here with us. They've got 4 weeks left at UCLA. We know they're not going to be in class for at least another week, right? But here's the thing. I look out across the nation. Northwestern capitulates to their students. Brown capitulates to their students. These UCLA guys maybe got pushed off campus for a minute, but you know they're thinking, what are we going to get from this administration? Because we've already seen the precedent.
And I think you guys set it up perfectly, because until President Biden, until it comes from the top, particularly if what he is saying is echoed throughout the lack of leadership at these universities, it is a de facto go for it. I mean, essentially, by saying not go for it, you're saying go for it.
Right.
By saying this is wrong, it's saying that this is not right, you're saying that it's not wrong, you're saying it's right. I mean, and this is what President Biden does. You know, and I just, as you were talking, Jackie, when you were talking about the lack of deterrence, the one thing that I kept thinking is, I've seen President Biden get so vitriolic, so angry, so frustrated at people who voted for Donald Trump in this country. He talks about MAGA Republicans like they're in a different country and are mortal enemies. He doesn't have 1 ounce of anger toward people who are threatening Jews. This is not free speech. Right. The encampment themselves are a form of physical threat, right? It's all physical threatening in the verb, the words, and then of course the chants. And it's scary stuff. No one would want to live under those environments, go to school under those environments. It is physically, the physical danger is there already. And someone said, you know, we're going to wait until it's too late. And I fear what too late could be is something that we don't even want to think about right now. But, I mean, what's to stop this from going to a really, truly ugly conclusion? Because these folks are becoming more and more emboldened by the minute.
I think just because we're heading into summer vacation doesn't mean that this is over
think about,
either.
Again, 1968. This could actually escalate into something. We can see riots throughout this entire country this summer. We've seen this script to a degree. You know, sometimes the topic changes or the people change, you know, but the forces that, because there are forces out there, no one leaves those expensive tents, no one leaves power tools if they pay for it themselves. Right.
Can we talk about the 60s? My dad was at that generation. I remember him telling me stories that he was on Stanford protesting the Vietnam War. People would be spitting on soldiers who were coming home, right? But then a few decades later, that generation turns out okay, and hopefully we're all okay. Is there hope for this generation that this is a moment?
Oh, sure. I mean, a lot of these, again, I think if you were to poll, take 100 of them at a time and say, okay, well, when you say from the river to the sea, you're chanting this. Do you know what river, what's sea, and what's the history behind that? Yeah. I would say, I bet you over 50%, maybe close to 80, 70% really don't truly know. But, you know, they know that they feel like something is wrong. Listen, the death toll of what's happening over in Gaza is scary stuff. And we know that Hamas orchestrated this whole thing. I think I was filling in for Neil either October 7th or 6th or 8th, right? Right at when this, and it was obvious on the very first day they were not going to beat Israel militarily. So what was their goal? And that was global sympathy. And that would mean mounting deaths, particularly children. But there's only one group that's responsible for that, and that's Hamas.
Right.
But you know what? It's tough to see, it's tough to read, and it's heartbreaking.
Charles, stay with us. We want to get your take on something else, of course, some of the other news of yesterday. Stocks had been climbing as the Fed keeps interest rates at a 23-year high for the 6th straight meeting. Fox Business's Hillary Vaughn joins us live from the White House with more on the messaging from the Fed. Hillary.
Hi, Taylor. Well, not a lot of clarity or optimism from the Federal Reserve on how they're going to get inflation down and when they're going to get down to their 2% goal. Fed Chair Jerome Powell saying inflation is still too high, but the path forward is uncertain and the progress to bring it down is, quote, not assured. Inflation isn't just too high. It's moving in the wrong direction. In March, CPI inflation showing inflation increased 0.4%, but any talk of stagflation isn't freaking out the Fed. Powell brushed off concerns that we may be entering an era of high unemployment, high inflation, and slow growth.
Right now we have 3% growth, which is, you know, pretty solid growth, I would say, by any measure. And we have inflation running under 3%. So I don't really understand where that's coming from. That wouldn't be stagflation. That would still be to a very healthy level of growth. We will return inflation to 2%. And that won't be, so I don't see the stag or the inflation, actually.
But even though inflation is not dropping, Powell doesn't seem in the mood to hike interest rates to get inflation down to the desired 2% level, telling Fox Business he doesn't see a reason why keeping the rates where they are will not bring inflation down to 2% eventually. Taylor?
Hillary, thank you so much for the recap.
Charles, I want to get back to you on this and talk about Powell's comments. He doesn't see the stag. He doesn't see the inflation. He also was the one who called inflation in the begining transitory.
Sure.
So it's hard for me to sit here and believe what he's saying now.
Yeah, I'm going to dissect this whole thing in my show because I'm going to go through all the most important parts of this presser because it was fascinating. Yeah. And you know it was fascinating because the market erupted. The Russell 2000 was up 2%. Bond yields came down, and all of a sudden it all turned around, right? Listen, this is a chair. Powell desperately still wants immaculate disinflation, and in part because that transitory thing, I think, just haunts him. It haunts him, and the only way to make that a footnote in his career is to somehow have this soft landing. But that puts us all at risk. How long do you ignore these inflationary signals? You know, because in January, Powell and the economists say, you know what, things happen in January. We were surprised it got cold. Anyway, it got cold in January. That messed up our modeling.
I've seen that.
But you can't ignore 3 months in a row. Some of these things you cannot ignore. I thought that what he said about wages was interesting too. Wages in a relationship to inflation. A lot of economists worry when wages are too high. You know that it helps. More buying. More buying than supply than demand. To me, it really is a very fascinating gambit that he's rolling the dice on right now. Really, really is.
Good word.
I've got a guess who's coming on who I think is one of the smartest guys on the street. He says Powell should have cut by 50 basis points yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hear you. Talk to me, though, about bond yields. I think what's interesting, traditionally, higher bond yields means lower equity markets, except if higher bond yields means higher growth, then equities can rise. Where are you at an almost 5%
here's the
yield?
thing. We had a 40-year bond rally, and bond yields came down for 40 years in a row, for the most part. 40 years, bond yields came down. The 40 years before that, they went up. In that period, we had a pretty good stock market, coupled with a whole lot of Fed accommodation. What if we go to a period like another 40 years when they just go up, 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 up?
Right.
I think honestly we have to start to realize that we're going to be in a new world. We're not going to zero.
Yeah.
And maybe 5, maybe 6. I do believe the stock market eventually adjusts because it always finds a way to adjust. But what does it mean for the housing market? What does it mean for people who have a lot of credit interest payments and things like that? I think this new world we're in just doesn't vanish overnight, particularly if Powell's not going to do anything about it.
New normal. Charles, always great to see you. We'll see you at the top of the hour. Thank you.